to do in brief is talk about some of the research that we've been doing around the whole area of goals. And we've been focusing on goals in coaching and mentoring, but as part of that research, we've had to look at goals in organisations as well. So I'm going to sort of, almost everything that we found that applies to individual relationships, learning relationships, also applies to organisations. And I got really deeply involved in this because when I did a PhD some years ago, one of the results that we weren't expecting was we started by measuring a number of attributes or aspects of mentoring and coaching relationships. And particularly, and what we looked at to start with was goal clarity. Did people really know when they came into this learning environment? Did they know what they wanted to learn, how they wanted to change, what they wanted to be different? And the second thing was their goal commitment. Were they really committed to that goal? And the third thing was what we call goal alignment, which is in essence a sense of purpose for the learning relationship. And then we compared this with the quality of the relationship and the outcomes, particularly for the mentee. And we were surprised to find there was no statistically significant correlation whatsoever between goal clarity and goal commitment and anything. But there was a strong correlation between sense of purpose and both quality of the relationship and outcomes. Interesting, we thought. And then my co-conspirator David Clutterbuck, who's authored a number of books with me, was also looking at interviewing lots of coaches and finding, actually, this doesn't work. What actually happens in practice doesn't actually link with what the theory books say. And so where's the evidence for it? And as we always do when we get into this stage, we say, okay, let's go and find what the evidence is. So we managed to pull together massive material from the critical figures in motivational theory, in goal theory, in coaching and mentoring, a number of other disciplines, including the guy who developed the chaos theory of careers, which is absolutely which is marvellous to go and look at if you get a chance to read about that. Because all careers, it seems, are increasingly chaotic. Who would say your career has been chaotic in the last 10 years? But there will be more of you as you come along, I can guarantee it. So what we did was basically look back into the literature and we started off with saying, well, what's a goal? And interestingly, when you actually look into the origins of the word goal, the original definition is, a goal is a boundary or limit. And that was surprising. Do we really, when we set goals for people when learning, do we want to set them a boundary or limit? Or is what we're about actually taking away the boundaries or limits? Very interesting stuff. And then we looked at SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. Yeah. Oh, yeah, somebody's already yawning over there. What we said, well, do these actually achieve anything? In fact, the answer is probably not. In fact, we tend to call SMART goals dim goals, that's dysfunctional interventions by management. And we gathered together a lot of research. What it showed us was that there were a number of problems with SMART goals. The first thing was that they reduced attentiveness. So if you've got a very specific goal, you tend to pursue it, but you don't see anything beside you. So Himinia Ibarra's work in INSEAD shows us quite clearly that the more specific the job role you're focused on getting, the slower your career advances. It's having this attentiveness to all the opportunities around you, but not so much you're not focused on anything, that actually enables people to make career progress. And then the short-termism. Businesses fail because they're too short-term, and they're too short-term because they overemphasize SMART goals. And there's increasing evidence around this. Now, this applies just as much to individuals and to private sector as it does, and I'm sure it applies in this sector too. Higher risk-taking. Some lovely case studies about people climbing Everest. And time and again, every year, this number of people, it happens to a few people, sometimes a lot. They get to within a couple of hours of the summit, and it's time to turn back. But they committed everything to getting here, that everything is good. They're so committed to this SMART, I've got to get to the summit. And they get there, obviously, but it's too late, and they don't get down. And the slopes of Everest are littered with the bodies of people who had SMART goals. And then we all look very serious about that. Then there's the unethical behaviour. What happens when people have set SMART goals, challenging goals, and they are about 10% away from it? Look across the National Health Service and you see what happens. People cheat. And if I asked, I'm not going to ask, but if I was asked you, what would actually you do if you were just below below meeting a critical target for your school? Would you actually fiddle a little bit? I'm not going to ask you to say yes or no, but I'm just going to ask you to examine your own consciences. And then in here it's learning as well. SMART goals focus learning on goals which are extrinsic rather than intrinsic, and they focus learning on achievement goals as opposed to mastery goals. And the research tells us that we're much more effective, we develop and perform much better if we work on learned on mastery goals rather than achievement goals. Anna McKee, 20 years ago, did a study of how people worked with SMART goals. She found that only 25% of people were motivated by SMART goals. Just a quarter of them. The rest of them, well, 25% roughly preferred to work on an image of a desired vision, 25% tend to focus on small steps towards something, and 25% didn't actually bother to plan at all, but just to let it all happen. And there didn't seem to be any significant difference in the success rates of these four strategies, which is pretty interesting, isn't it? Given how many goals we keep being set. Carl Weick, lovely quote, says, SMART goals gull responsiveness to the complex and emergent nature of organisational life. Yeah. We are not living in simple linear systems, we are living in complex adaptive systems. And the relationship between the college and the students is a complex adaptive system. And if we treat it like a simple linear system, we're going to make mistakes. And there are some of the things that clients have told us about goals. I've already got 13 organisations setting me goals, I don't need a 14th, says someone to their coach. Yeah. I don't know what to address yet, and by the time I do, the goal will be a thing of the past anyway. And some of the coaches themselves, goal considering is just a routine. It's something you do because it's convenient. It's largely there for the benefit of the coach. It's not there for the benefit of the client. It's a crutch that you lean on. Goals help your coach for actually or enable the coach not to be fully present. If you're fully present, you're really listening to somebody. If you've got a nice structure you can follow, like the GROW model, most of you have done coaching, we'll all know about the GROW model. It stands for Get Rich on Waffle. Because it starts off with the idea you've got to have a fixed goal at the beginning and stick to that goal. That the client or solutions focus coach, that the client wants a solution. Do they? Who says? In most cases that we find, or many cases we find, particularly in the leadership level, people they're not looking for somebody to help them work on a specific goal. They're actually helping you, they need the help to work out what it is they want. And once they've worked out what it is they want to achieve, they don't actually need you anymore because they're smart enough to do it themselves. So it's really a large waste of time very often. And so what we found is that all the research evidence we could identify from all the different fields tells us that if we put all the data together, goal setting and goal pursuit are far more complex, far more nuanced than the simplistic assumptions that we see around us. And so specifically what we found is that goals emerge. There was a study by Harvard Business Review of 200 coaches in the States. And all but 9 of those said that the goals that they started with in their relationships usually changed by the time they were halfway through. So the goals you start with are not the goals that you end with. You need to allow for consistency, for change. And we need to avoid what's called the sunk cost trap. Like the guys on Everest, you put so much effort into something, you've got to make that goal go through. But actually what's much more effective is reviewing goals on a regular basis and say, actually, do we really still need that? Is it important? Is that a priority? And having the courage to throw them away, even though we put money and lots of effort into them. That's tough, that takes courage. So the other things that have come out very, very clearly is that there's a hierarchy of goals. And the people have a superordinate goal, or some superordinate goals, some big ones, that relate very close to their personal values. And organisations do too. And the more we can articulate that, the easier it is to take those subordinate goals and to link them and actually make them feasible, to work out which are really important and which are not. And so if we actually start to look at goals and link them to our values, there's a number of things we can do. We can certainly start to think about what's the point of a particular goal. And when we get people bringing a goal to us, there's a number of questions that we ask. So, why this goal? Why now? Really good question. Is it truly your goal? Is it actually somebody else's goal that's been set for you? Because if it's somebody else's, you're going to have only extrinsic motivation, not intrinsic motivation to achieve it. So you're less likely to make it happen. Is it a subset of a larger goal or a number of connected goals? So really, looking in behind it, how does this goal align with your values? And if you're going to achieve this goal, what are you going to stop doing in order to make the space and the time and the energy and resources to do it? Now, very often we find organisations have been setting stretch goals for themselves or for individuals. And some research about 18 months ago looking at stretch goals basically blew them apart. Because lots of organisations talk about stretch goals. If any of you actually set stretch goals in your organisation, goals which are really challenging, beyond what people might normally be able to do. One or two of you are nodding, not many. Okay, well, they're in particularly American organisations, they're very common. And what the research says is that stretch goals only work when there are two factors in favour of them. One of those factors is that the people involved are riding on a high tide of success. They've won. There's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a momentum and energy for making things happen because they've succeeded in everything else that they've done. And the second thing is there are the resources available to be able to do extra resources to invest in making those stretch goals happen. Now, so when an organisation sets stretch goals for itself, if either of those variables is not there, they are going to fail. And we see this time and time again. Most organisations that set themselves stretch goals do so when they're in the other stuff. And therefore, stretch goals really don't work. So the conclusion that we've come to, basically, when we're working with individuals, is that it helps somebody find their sense of purpose. What are they there for? And the goals will follow. And once the goals follow, actually what they need very little help in making the goals happen. And the same would apply to organisations. What is the purpose of the organisation? Why is it here? And I'll leave you with just one thought, which is the touchstone question, which I find really fascinating. A long time ago, back in the early 1980s, we did some research on excellent organisations. Organisations that consistently, over many years, outperformed their peers. And we want to see what were the factors behind it. Now, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner, has quite rightly questioned the methodologies behind some of these studies, and I think he's right. But when we were doing this, it seemed like good practice. But one of the companies we visited was Clark's Shoes. Now, I bet probably a third of the people in the room were wearing Clark's shoes, possibly. Yeah. And what we want to know is how come they'd survived when every other shoe manufacturer had gone out of business? And so we went down to see them in this grotty little village in Somerset called Street. I hope I'm not offending anybody's hometown. Oh, good. That's fair enough. It only had a pub. It only had its first pub in about 1960s. But they've got this beautiful showroom, stunning. Obviously built to sell. And then we went upstairs, we went to the next building, upstairs, into the boardroom. And I literally stepped back. Because in the boardroom, nobody's spent any money on this for decades. There were holes in the carpet, there was plaster falling off the walls, it was clean. But it was clear nobody spent a penny on this. And the chief executive says, "You're wondering about the contrast, aren't you?" I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Well, it's quite simply said, it's the company question. But does it sell shoes?" And since then, we were involved with loads of organisations and teams and individuals. What is your touchstone question, or your touchstone questions? The questions that really go back to your style. What are we here for you? What's the question you ask every time you want to make a decision? Is this goal really important, for example? And the touchstone question is very different for different organisations, different for individuals. But if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this is, what's the touchstone question for you personally? What's the touchstone question for your college? Thank you.